Is Ukraine continuing to make progress in Bakhmut? And is the U.S. Starting to roll out just a little bit of copium on Ukraine's counteroffensive? We're going to break all this down right now. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's July 9th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first let's take a look at the control map. There actually hasn't been any updates since the 8th when we've talked about the progress outside of Klitschivka, as well as outside of Novodarivka, which, again, definitely significant, noteworthy progress outside of Novodarivka, even though we've seen much less in the aggregate happening in the Zaporizhzhia province region. When we go over to the combat map, though, we do see at least some updates as of 6 hours ago, a lot of shelling and a lot of counterattacks by Russian forces, right? We can see that they are attempting to counterattack outside Velika Novosilka, right, in Orozane, where Ukrainian forces probably pushing to liberate Staromayorsk. But you can see here, again, these advances that we talked about outside Priutine. And slowly, Ukrainian forces are completing what I think is their objective, which is encircling Staromayorsk or creating pressure along the flanks in such a way that Russian forces, instead of having to clear them out of the town, Russian forces will risk annihilation, since you can see Staromayorsk is actually really, there is one road out of the city that Ukraine doesn't control. And so if they can get close enough to apply pressure onto this road, especially you can see this river here indicates to us that this is low ground. And so I suspect Ukraine's goal is probably to get to some of these high ground positions, be able to put direct fire onto this roadway. And once they can do that, Russian forces that are holding out in Staromayorsk, they're going to have a really hard time withdrawing. And so they'll either be forced to withdraw under considerable casualties, be unable to get resupplied from this north-south road. But as we've talked about, the efficiency of encirclement is hard to overstate. It's really enables the attacker, the encircler, to inflict considerable casualties at really not much cost, and either considerable casualties or considerable territorial gain, both of which are to Ukraine's advantage. When we look over at Bakhmut, again, we can see how much progress has been made, and actually we're going to switch it over and talk a little bit about Klitschivka, but you can see this is listing all of Klitschivka as liberated, and up until this railway here, which is quite considerable, actually. And you can see again this effort to encircle Bakhmut continues from Ukraine. So again, Ukraine firmly in the driver's seat, but again, the breakthrough offensives that they need to find, right? They need to find a way to liberate large portions of territory, whether that is, again, through a larger scale of encirclement, isolating Russian forces from their logistics support, and then pressuring them until they withdraw, a la Kherson, breaking the actual Russian lines themselves, a la Kharkiv. Both playbooks are valid and are good strategies that are proven to work in this conflict. But the question is, of course, which one is best for which situation? Again, we've talked about my theory on the best areas to attempt a breakthrough, especially outside of Bakhmut. And again, as you guys can see, right, the easiest place to achieve a breakthrough is probably along this north-south corridor here. It would enable them to, again, clear out this fortification, and then begin to turn Russian lines in any of these areas, right? But it would require achieving a breakthrough outside of Andriivka and Klitschivka, right, and not really confronting this significant Russian fortification that runs north-south and connects to this reservoir here. So, again, easier said than done, certainly, but this is probably represents some of the best, I think, the best hole, so to speak, in Russian lines. Anyway, I did want to talk real quick. The last point here is War Mapper is actually reporting as of about 2 hours ago, Ukrainian forces have been geolocated operating in the actual town of Burkiva. Let's see if we can make this a little bit larger. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So here's the Burkiva reservoir. This actually shows them contesting all the way to the railhead in Burkiva. Let's see if we can find this on a slightly more detailed map here so that we can triangulate where they are operating. So here's Burkiva. So this actually places them actually quite a bit. So we would, on this map, we'd call it Yadhine, but it shows Ukrainian forces at least trying to operate in this region here. So that's actually pretty considerable progress by Ukraine, if indeed this is true, that they'll have covered from this point here to out here. So that's 2 kilometers in the span of potentially as little as 2 days. And again, it's not clear that they've liberated it, but I assume that Ukrainian forces are going to be operating at the line of control, or only slightly beyond the line of control, especially given the tactics we've seen so far, right? There's not a lot of these like deep penetration raids that are happening at scale. Anyway, if you're interested, guys, in seeing some of the combat footage analysis, obviously YouTube really does not like me to cover that. Patreon doesn't like me to cover that, so that's why I've launched combatvetnews.com. It's basically my answer to Patreon. I have in the members-only area dozens of videos where I do analysis of the most recent viral combat footage. Just a few days ago, we took a look at some of the operations on the front line. We've seen some tanks and anti-tank operations, mine clearing, that sort of thing. And it really gives us insight into what exactly the Ukrainians are doing tactically, and how effective it is. So if you want to support what I do, any one of these tiers is going to get you access to an exclusive room on the Discord, as well as access to this members only video. Of course, higher tiers will get you shout outs at the end of these daily updates, etc. So, and I appreciate all you guys that support me. You really do enable me to do what I do. Certainly sponsors don't want to touch it, but I think what I do, providing this objective analysis, is really important. Anyway, we are on the 500th day of Russia's war against Ukraine, and Ukrainian forces, right, continue their counteroffensive. But what I thought was most interesting is the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, which is a significant position, to be clear, a very high-level position in the DoD. Colin Kahl said on July 7th that Ukrainian operations all across the front are the, quote, beginning of the middle of the wider counteroffensive, and that therefore it's too early to judge how the offensive is going. I'm skeptical because General Miley said, has really reduced expectations, right? There were a lot of high expectations for this, and General Miley has sort of brought them down to reality, the reality we're seeing. We usually, in military planning, when someone says it's the beginning of the middle, what that means is this marks the end of phase 1 and a transition to a phase 2. Generally, these operate in 4 phases is probably the average, being a shaping phase, a phase 1 of the operation, then a phase 2, which is usually the main offensive thrust. Phase 3 is consolidation, reorganization, and phase 4 is transitioning to whatever's next, continued offensive operations, defensive efforts, and consolidation. So we'll be very curious to see if this is indeed true, which I'm moderately skeptical of. And if what exactly phase 2 looks like. Again, the ISW assesses that the pace of the counteroffensive is reflective of a deliberate and strategic effort to create an asymmetrical attrition gradient, conserve Ukrainian manpower, and attrit Russian manpower, even at the cost of advances. This is, again, possible that this is just that is part of the shaping operation across the battlefield, that grinding out Russian defenses, grinding out Russian logistics, grinding down Russian units is inherent to the objective here. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little skeptical. I think more likely what's happened is that Ukraine has either realized that its strategy in this counteroffensive is not working. Basically, if you look at their strategy, it looks a lot like the Russian offensive. Lots of locations, a wide range of areas where forces are being concentrated and deployed. And the result is sort of a lack of punching power, right? It's sort of like trying to cut a piece of, cut through cardboard with a baseball bat. It's actually would be way easier to just get a spear or a knife and penetrate it. But instead you're trying to bash it in over too wide a surface area. But this is exactly how the Russian offensive went as well, right? A broad swath of areas where only in one did they achieve any sort of real gains, and they never in that course of that ever really did anything that looks like a breakthrough. I think the U.S. probably is either was ignored or refused to provide full intelligence assistance. I think now with U.S. and I suspect that now you're seeing U.S. intelligence start to provide more or be listened to more in terms of the data they provide, right? Location of Russian forces, times of logistics supplies. We're seeing more ammunition depots get hit. We're seeing Russian logistics hub get targeted. And we're seeing more steady Ukrainian gains. And I think that's not an accident. I think that's because U.S. planners and U.S. intel analysts are either, again, being listened to or are providing a greater pipeline of data to Ukrainian forces so that they can, when they go into an area, when they conduct operations, they do so with a way, way, way greater knowledge of the enemy in front of them. So we'll see. I will be very curious to see how this all goes. Anyway, thank you so much, as always, to our Colonel tier members of CombatVetNews.com. I really can't do this without you guys. I say it every video, but I mean it. Thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. Again, you guys are what make this possible. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one.